You left the conversation believing the decision had been yours. Days later, you realized it hadn't. You replayed it. The words were yours. The conclusion felt like yours. But somewhere in the middle of the conversation, something shifted, so subtly you didn't notice it happening. And by the end, you were standing in a position you hadn't entered with. The opinion was yours, but it didn't start in you. Think about that. Someone else planted the seed, watered it with the right questions, made sure it grew in the right direction, and then stepped back and let you arrive at the conclusion they had intended from the beginning, while you felt genuinely and completely that you had gotten there yourself. The guilt was yours too, but it didn't belong to you. You felt responsible for something that wasn't your fault, not because you were confused about the facts, because someone had been very careful about how they arranged those facts, which ones they showed you, which ones they withheld, what order they presented them in. And in that arrangement, a version of events emerged in which you were the person who had caused the problem. You accepted it, because by the time you were presented with it, you had already been prepared to accept it. The favor seemed generous. It was offered without conditions, without expectation, with the specific warmth of someone who simply wanted to help. But it came with a debt you never agreed to carry, a debt that became visible only later, when the favor was referenced in a context where you needed to agree with something, support something, overlook something you would not have overlooked without it. The debt was never stated. It didn't need to be. It was understood, and you honored it because refusing to honor it would have required a conversation neither of you was going to have. And when you finally understood what had happened, when you were able to see the full shape of it from a distance, the thing that disturbed you most wasn't the manipulation. It was how invisible it had been. It was that you hadn't seen it. Not because you weren't paying attention, because you were paying attention to exactly what you had been directed to pay attention to. And that is the thing about manipulation that nobody warns you about. It doesn't feel like manipulation while it's happening. It feels like a conversation, a relationship, a normal exchange between two people who are trying to understand each other. The mechanism is invisible because it is designed to be invisible, because a manipulation you can see is a manipulation that doesn't work. Think about the times it has happened in smaller ways. The conversation where someone kept asking questions until your position shifted, without you noticing the shift. The moment someone expressed hurt and you spent the next hour trying to repair something you didn't break. The time a story was told about you, to you, and you nodded along because the story was constructed from true facts, arranged in a way that produced a false conclusion. Small moments, each one forgettable on its own. The accumulation is the damage. Here is the belief that most people carry into adulthood and never examine. Manipulation happens to people who aren't paying attention, to people who are naive, to people who lack the intelligence or the education or the life experience to recognize what's happening when it's happening to them. This belief is not just wrong, it is the belief that makes intelligent people easier to manipulate than almost anyone else. Some of the easiest people to manipulate are highly intelligent, because intelligence helps you justify what your emotions already want to believe. Think about what that means. A sophisticated person doesn't accept a manipulation passively. They construct a rational framework around it. They find the evidence that supports the conclusion they've been guided toward and organize it into an argument that satisfies their need for internal consistency. They don't feel manipulated because they've done the intellectual work of arriving at the position. The conclusion feels earned because they built the justification themselves. The manipulator didn't need them to be gullible. They needed them to be smart enough to do their own convincing. This is not a theoretical observation. You have done this. You have taken a conclusion that was handed to you, subtly, skillfully, through the arrangement of information, rather than through explicit argument, and built around it an entire architecture of reasoning that made it feel like your own. The reasoning was yours. The starting point wasn't. This is why the defense against manipulation is not intelligence. It is not critical thinking, not skepticism, not the analytical capacity to evaluate arguments. All of these can be turned against you. All of these can be used to construct the very framework that keeps the manipulation invisible. The defense is something different, something more interior and more difficult to develop. It is the capacity to notice what you are feeling before you build the story around the feeling. To catch the emotion before the intelligence takes over and turns it into a coherent narrative. To ask, not what do I think about this, but what do I want to be true about this, and how might that wanting be shaping what I am seeing? That question is one of the most difficult questions available. It requires a quality of honesty about your own inner life that most people never develop because they never need to, until they do. The person who has developed this capacity is not someone who trusts no one. They are not suspicious or closed or cynical about human nature. They are simply someone who has learned to hold two tracks simultaneously: the track of the conversation that is happening and the track of the question about what the conversation is actually for. This double awareness is not paranoia. It is the specific literacy of someone who has been moved before and decided to understand the mechanism rather than simply resent the result. And here is what that literacy produces over time. Not coldness, not distance. The specific warmth of someone who is genuinely present, who is actually in the room rather than performing being in the room, because they are not simultaneously managing a fear about what the room might do to them. The person who has done this work is often more connected, not less, because their connections are chosen rather than defended. The moment you can hold that question, genuinely, without immediately answering it in the direction that feels most comfortable, you become significantly harder to move, not because you have become smarter, because you have become more honest about the relationship between what you feel and what you believe. Manipulation does not require a villain. This is the part that makes it so difficult to name and so difficult to defend against. The people who manipulate you are not, in most cases, people who have sat down and designed a campaign. They are people who have learned, through experience, through trial and error, through the accumulated knowledge of what works with specific people in specific situations, that certain approaches produce certain results. And the approaches that produce results are always, without exception, organized around something you already need. The manipulator does not create needs. He finds the ones that already exist. This is the insight that changes everything. You needed to be liked. They became what you needed them to be. You needed to be understood. They reflected your own words back to you in a way that made you feel seen. You needed to avoid conflict. They created a situation in which agreeing was easier than confronting. You needed to be chosen. They made you compete for their attention until being chosen by them felt like a validation of something much deeper than their approval. They didn't install these needs in you. The needs were there. What they did was find them, map them, and then build their approach around the specific shape of what you couldn't live without. Your need for approval made you adjust your behavior when they expressed disappointment. Your need to be understood made you over-explain yourself, and in over-explaining, hand them information they could use. Your need to avoid conflict made you absorb things you should have named. Your guilt made you responsible for things that weren't yours to carry. None of these needs are weaknesses. They are human. The need to belong, to be understood, to avoid pain, to be chosen. These are not character flaws. They are the landscape of every human interior. But an unmapped landscape is a territory that others can navigate better than you can. The work of closing your points of entry is not the work of eliminating your needs. It is the work of mapping them yourself before someone else does. Of knowing, specifically, honestly, without the comfortable vagueness of self-deception, what you cannot live without, what you will compromise to preserve, what you will believe because you need it to be true, because what you know about yourself cannot be used against you in the same way. The known need is a need you can manage. The unknown need is an open door. And the person who has never sat with the question, what do I need so badly that I would bend my judgment to protect it, is walking through the world with every door open and no idea which ones are being used. Mapping your needs is not a single conversation with yourself. It is a practice. It happens in the moments when you notice yourself adjusting before you have consciously decided to adjust. When you feel relief at someone's approval, and you ask yourself what you were afraid of losing. When you feel guilt and you pause before absorbing it and ask whether the guilt is calibrated to something you actually did. These pauses are small. They are also the entire practice. Each one is a moment of reclaiming your own cartography. There is a specific kind of person that manipulators avoid. not the aggressive person. Aggression is actually useful to manipulators. It is reactive, predictable, easy to work around, and easier to use as evidence against whoever is displaying it, not the suspicious person. Suspicion is also manageable. It creates distance that confirms the manipulator's narrative of being misunderstood, and it isolates the suspicious person from the alliances they need. The person manipulators avoid is the person they cannot read. Not because this person is cold or closed or deliberately mysterious. Because this person's responses are not determined by the manipulator's inputs. Because when the approval is withdrawn, they do not scramble. When the guilt is applied, they examine it rather than absorbing it. When the narrative is offered, they notice the narrative before they step into it. They are not reacting, they are observing. And an observer is the most dangerous person in any manipulation, because observation requires no particular strength or aggression. It requires only the ability to see what is happening before deciding what to do about it. There is something specific that makes this person unreadable. It is not that they hide themselves. It is that their behavior is not organized around other people's reactions. They do not perform calm. They are calm because their internal state is not contingent on whether the manipulation is working. They do not perform confidence. They are settled because their sense of direction does not require external confirmation to feel valid. The manipulator studies people through their reactions. A person whose reactions are not predictable, who does not perform the expected response to the applied pressure, gives the manipulator no data to work with. And without data, the approach cannot be calibrated. And an approach that cannot be calibrated cannot work. There is also something else about this person that makes them impossible to manipulate through the most common mechanisms. They do not need what manipulation feeds on. They have done enough internal work that their sense of their own worth is not contingent on external approval. Their direction is set from inside, rather than determined by whoever is currently expressing disappointment. Their guilt is calibrated. They feel it when they have actually done something wrong, not when someone has arranged the facts to make them feel responsible. They are not invulnerable. Nobody is invulnerable. But the specific tools that manipulation requires, the leveraging of need, the exploitation of approval seeking, the weaponization of guilt, these tools find no purchase in someone who has closed the corresponding entry points, not by becoming hard, by becoming whole. There is a specific test you can apply. When someone in your life withdraws warmth or approval, notice your first impulse. If your first impulse is to fix it, to repair the connection, to find out what you did, to adjust yourself to restore the warmth, that impulse is a point of entry. It is not a character flaw, it is human, but it is also a signal about where your behavior is being directed from. The person who has done the work of closing this entry point does not feel nothing when warmth is withdrawn. They simply do not scramble. They notice the withdrawal. They observe what it is being used to produce, and they decide, from inside rather than in reaction, whether the relationship warrants repair and what form that repair should take. Most people, when they discover they are being manipulated, react. They confront, they accuse, they express the anger or the hurt that the discovery produced, and in doing so, they hand the manipulator exactly what they need. A reaction that can be labeled as disproportionate, as aggressive, as evidence that the manipulated person is the problem. The reaction confirms the narrative. The narrative was designed to produce a reaction that would confirm it. The alternative is not to suppress the reaction. It is to create space between the stimulus and the response, enough space to observe what is happening before deciding how to move within it. When someone expresses disappointment to change your behavior, notice that first. Before you feel guilty, before you adjust, before you begin the automatic process of making the disappointment stop, simply notice it. Disappointment is being used here. What does that tell me about what is actually happening? When a narrative is offered that positions you as responsible for something, pause before you accept the positioning. Narratives are constructions. This one was constructed by someone. What did they include and what did they leave out? What version of events is this and who benefits from it being the version I accept? When a favor arrives, notice whether it comes with expectations that weren't disclosed. Not all favors are manipulation. But the favor that creates debt without consent is a specific kind of offer. It can be declined, not dramatically, simply by not accepting the terms that weren't stated. When someone escalates emotionally in a way that seems designed to make thinking clearly impossible, that escalation is information. Not about the situation, about the method. The person who needs you to stop thinking clearly before you respond is the person who benefits from your reaction being faster than your observation. Slow down. The situation will still be there after you have understood it. This is responding rather than reacting. The reaction is automatic, emotional, driven by the feeling of the moment. The response is deliberate, calibrated, informed by the observation that precedes it. The manipulator depends on the reaction. The reaction is the confirmation that the mechanism is working. Remove the reaction, not by suppressing it, but by inserting the observation that comes before it, and the mechanism loses its feedback loop. It does not know what to do with someone who simply watches. And here is what watching actually looks like in practice. It is not a dramatic pause. It is not the performed composure of someone who has decided to appear unbothered. It is the genuine stillness of someone who has learned to ask, before they feel, before they react, before they adjust, what is actually happening here? Not what appears to be happening. What is actually happening? Who benefits from my response? What this situation requires of me, if I am reading it clearly, and what it is trying to get me to do if I am not. That question, asked consistently and honestly, is one of the most powerful things available to anyone who has ever found themselves in a room with someone who knows how to use people. It does not require strength, it requires honesty. And honesty, directed inward with the same precision you would direct it outward, is the one thing that manipulation cannot work around. Every manipulation begins with a need. The need to be liked, the need to be understood, the need to be chosen, the need to avoid conflict, the need to be approved. These are not shameful needs, they are human needs. They exist in every person without exception. The question is not whether you have them, you do, but whether you know them well enough to keep them from being used against you. The person who cannot be manipulated is not the strongest person in the room. It is the person who no longer needs what manipulation feeds on, not because they have eliminated their needs, because they have looked at them directly, named them honestly, and stopped pretending they don't exist. And in that looking, in that naming, they have taken back the map of their own interior from anyone who might have used it against them. This is the work, not the dramatic work of confronting manipulators or exposing their tactics, or becoming someone who is too strong to be touched. The quiet, interior, often uncomfortable work of sitting with the question, what do I need so badly that I would bend my judgment to protect it? What would I believe, overlook, absorb, or justify to avoid losing it? The answers are not flattering. They never are. But they are yours. And what is yours, fully known, fully named, fully acknowledged, cannot be weaponized against you by someone who found it before you did. Manipulation does not begin when someone tries to control you. It begins when they discover what you cannot live without. The less you need, the less they can use. That is the whole equation. There is nothing more complicated than this. Not strategy, not tactics, not the specific counter-moves for specific manipulative behaviors. The interior work of becoming someone who knows their own needs, manages their own reactions, and does not offer entry points to people who have learned to find them. The person who has done that work is not invincible, but they are, in every practical sense that matters, free.